To say that the new Superman movie has people talking is an understatement. Some diehards will say Henry Cavill was the best Superman. Some will say there hasn't been a good Superman movie since Christopher Reeve wore his underwear on the outside. Either way, he loses at the box office to Batman. Why is that? Well, part of the problem is that Superman is an absolute nightmare to write for. Why? Well, let's talk about it. Before we get into that, though, here's a reminder to check out dcferguson.com for all my latest videos, overviews of my books, exclusive behind-the-scenes content for each of my series, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I should also mention that you can help me out in a big way if you like this video, subscribe, and share it with any friends that also enjoy the art of storytelling. So let's start off with a good old-fashioned bias check. Did I love Superman growing up? Yes. Watched all the Christopher Reeve movies, including the awful fourth one? Check. Was I there opening day for Man of Steel? Best believe it. And how about for this new Superman movie? Not only was I there, I was wearing my Superman wedding ring and my Superman t-shirt. There you go. I'm a fan, like a huge fan of the character. Let me also explain that this is not a review of the new film. The new film, it was fine. They had some parts I really loved, some parts I really didn't, but nothing I absolutely hated. What it did manage to do was to remind me just how hard Superman is to write for, and why. There are a lot of reasons, which we're going to get into today, but one of the biggest ones is armor. Superman doesn't just have plot armor because he's the main character. He is also physically armored to the point of being impossible to harm. This creates a number of difficult choices that have to be made on the writing side that almost invariably paint that writer into some corner. This is something that we, as storytellers, really want to avoid in our own writing, so understanding Superman is key to understanding plot armor ourselves. We can start by defining what plot armor is and what it is not. Plot armor is the idea that because of the plot of the story, there are no real stakes. Our protagonist can get hurt, but they can't really die, because then the story ends. Notoriously, the subversion of that blew our collective minds was the death of Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, where the entire first season seemed to frame him as the protagonist. Many audiences had never seen something like that before done in storytelling. Now, like I said last week, you can't really imagine Indiana Jones is going to die jumping from a motorcycle to a truck halfway through the movie, because what are we doing with the rest of the movie called Indiana Jones, right? Here's the problem though, plot armor gets thrown around a lot nowadays in a negative way toward exactly that Indiana Jones example that I gave, and that's dumb. Storytelling is rarely ever going to feature tales that end abruptly because that doesn't make for good stories. Yeah, he was gonna find the Ark of the Covenant, but he died. That isn't the point of critiquing plot armor. We rightly critique plot armor when the writer creates a scenario where no one could have survived to stop the big bad, but because the protagonist is the protagonist, they just did it anyway, either because of a ridiculous improbable luck, deus ex machina, or they're extremely talented at something they've never done before. Superman is a different beast altogether. He is physically strong enough to lift a building, but he can also fly over the building, and if the building falls on him, his skin is virtually impenetrable. So, in addition to plot armor, he's also armored and akin to a god. This makes almost any threat to him trivial, because the only thing that could beat Superman is another Superman, right? Some writers did understand this point, like Zack Snyder with Man of Steel. In that film, Superman was battling his own kind, which made the playing field somewhat more even. Superman 2 used these exact same villains as well, and it makes sense. It raises the stakes. But now that we have a villain equally as powerful as Superman, we're going to get destruction on a massive scale. Again, Snyder understood this and even used it as the basis for Batman v Superman. The reason I bring it up, however, is that you as a writer are now painted into a corner to complete this story. The evil Kryptonian General Zod either has to be imprisoned in something that can believably hold him, like the Phantom Zone in Superman 2 and the comics, or Superman has no choice but to kill him, like in Man of Steel. That option truly left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and it's easy to see why. Superman is a beacon of hope. He has literally always been written that way. Raised as their own son, his adoptive human parents were simple farm folk in rural Kansas. There, Superman learned to be the best of us by being raised in a good home and taught good American values. By the time he became a teenager and his powers developed, it was already instilled in him what it meant to be a good person. His powers were so great that he knew he would have to use them for the betterment of mankind. His motivation for this is a kind of sense that he's indebted to Earth and all of humanity for giving him a life and a home when they didn't have to. That is truly beautiful. It's also a nightmare for writers. Having an ethos like Superman means he can't use bullying, intimidation tactics, murder, or any other extreme use of force to get his way. As we all well know, living in the real world, bad people have no such handicaps. What's to stop a truly sick person from using cold-blooded, indiscriminate murder to get Superman to do what they want? Well, this new Superman film tried to touch on that, but it got lost in the shuffle instead of being the actual focus of the story. We'll get into that in a second. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is yet another trap of writing Superman. Any story where someone would try to manipulate Superman to do their bidding would become a story not about Superman being compelled to obey, but to find every means possible to subvert it and find the puppet master trying to pull his strings. Superman can't ever be caught in such conundrums because complying and doing something evil, even once, dirties his hands and he's just not the same character anymore. This hands-clean necessity of the character makes it so that you almost can't give Superman complicated villains or ethical conundrums. So how do we tackle a character that can't be hurt, is stronger than everyone, can fly faster than the speed of sound, and shoots lasers from his eyes? Well, give him a single weakness, a radioactive rock from his homeworld that immediately drains his powers and immobilizes him. This is a premise that becomes a problem for us writers as well, for one obvious reason. Using it on Superman is either A, only temporary until Superman gets clear of it and regains his powers, or B, he's subdued to the point that he can be killed. Since B is never going to happen, the answer to this weakness is always A. Are you starting to see what I mean about him being so hard to write for? So many choices are made for you as a writer, and so many things are completely off the table. But therein lies the saving grace of Superman. His greatest villain, Lex Luthor. I have to be honest, I don't really feel like any Hollywood writer has ever truly used Lex Luthor correctly or understood what makes him such an incredible threat to Superman the way the comics have. This is a normal human. Superman could crush him like a bug anytime he wants. The impasse between them is that Luthor can never match Superman's ability to overcome, and Superman can never cross the line and put an end to the threat of Luthor. Lex Luthor is an Elon Musk-like figure, a multi-billionaire CEO so well connected to governments all over the world that he can buy his way out of anything. No one can arrest him. No one can stop him from pursuing his goals and ruining lives in the process. This is a perfect metaphor for the worst of humanity, the exact foil for Superman, someone that wasn't raised to value human life, that doesn't feel like he's a part of something bigger in society, but instead is narcissistic, manipulative, and wealthy enough to never have to pay the consequences for his wrongdoing. That last part is so incredibly important because I have watched Lex Luthor go to jail at the end of every damn Superman movie since I was a kid, and that's just not how Lex works in the comics, and it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the character. Lex Luthor is at his best when the law can't touch him. No matter how evil his plans are, no matter how many messes he's made, or the lives he made suffer, all Superman can do is try to make it better and foil Luthor's plans, but he can't make Luthor pay. That's the eternal struggle between these two. If Superman gives in to his most base instincts and crushes Luthor to bits, the next logical step is to do it for everyone that Superman views as bad for Earth, and that's a road to despotic godhood. If Luthor gets his hands dirty to the point that he could be arrested and convicted, then he has failed as an effective villain because he's no longer the genius we thought he was. But wait, there's more that makes Superman incredibly difficult to write for. He also affects the writing of every single hero and villain in his orbit. Yeah, it's Superman's world and we're all just living in it. You see, when you bring over, let's say, Batman, Superman's eagle eyes and X-ray vision immediately can see right through the mask, and he knows the secret identity of Batman. I use Batman as an example here because the only guy in New York with as much money as Lex Luthor is the playboy billionaire Bruce Wayne, someone that Superman would recognize right away. So secret identities are kind of out the window. Then there's the one truly galling thing from the new Superman movie that did grind my gears. Don't worry, there's no spoiler necessary here. There is a bad guy in the movie that one of the supporting heroes decides to just, let die. Because, quote unquote, I'm not Superman. Well, yeah, but you still have to work with him. When this whole big fight is over, and everything is done, somebody's gonna ask, hey, how did this guy end up dead? And when Superman finds out it was you, best case scenario is he'll never work with you again. Worst case scenario is that he delivers you to the police on the spot and has you arrested. So, being a big, edgy anti-hero doesn't really work either. If you're in Superman's orbit as a hero, you're either playing by his code or you can let yourself out the door. Ultimately, though, Superman doesn't need other heroes. He's so strong and so fast that the only thing he can't do is be in two places at once. So the only time that he ever really needs help is when he needs you at a place he can't be. And where is Superman? Well, he's where the real story is taking place with the big bad guy. Speaking of which, some guy in a clown suit gets out on parole and immediately starts gassing people. He gets arrested 20 minutes after the first time he pulls that. Unlike Batman, who's a regular guy, Superman can't have mundane villains. Each and every one of his villains has to bring something to the table that is worthy of a match for Superman in some way or another. For the level that Superman is at, by the time you have 5 or 6 of these genuinely credible threats for Superman, you basically have enough power between these guys to destroy the world several times over. You see how that could be a real problem to write, especially long term? There's also one more aspect to Superman that makes life really difficult, and that's the obvious question. How do we keep him grounded enough that he doesn't become that despotic god tyrant? There are 2 answers to this. One I believe Hollywood has gotten right, and the other I think they've gotten really wrong more often than not. The part they get right is ace reporter Lois Lane. In every iteration of the character, she's a former military brat that is a brash reporter unafraid to go into war zones and report from the front lines. She is the whirlwind of chaotic good that makes perfect sense as an opposites attract relationship for Superman. The thought of Superman finding love amongst us humans also makes perfect sense as a means to keep him grounded and bound to humanity. The other part is the memory of his adoptive parents in Kansas. In the new movie, I felt that they were a little too redneck, almost dumb. His father's wisdom seems to come from a place of being, quote-unquote, simple folk, and apparently the writer thought simple and dumb were interchangeable words. That I didn't like. In the Zack Snyder version, Pa Kent is an armchair philosopher with a deep-seated fear that humanity would turn against Clark Kent the second they saw what he was capable of. He believed it so strongly that he made his son watch as he died in a tornado rather than have Clark save him. I can't begin to describe how dumb I think this plot point is and what a terrible tone and message it sends. If anything, that kind of thing would sow the seeds of distrust that Superman would be so convinced that he'll be hated for his powers that he disengages from humanity completely or decides that we're lesser beings that should be in service to him, a la Homelander from The Boys. The only one I feel got this family right is the Richard Donner Superman back in the 70s. It uniquely understood that when Pa Kent died of a heart attack, Clark literally couldn't do anything to save him. For all of his powers, there was nothing Superman could do. The message there is that if he can do something to save a life, he always should. You see how much better that works? It also brings us to where we can mine the most gold from this lesson. We want to look at how writers of the past have successfully subverted all of these storytelling conundrums to make Superman a literal piece of American history. One of the first storylines I'll talk about is from the critically acclaimed Superman for All Seasons. In this particular and very human story, Ma and Pa Kent are doing their best to support a young Clark Kent as he leaves their home to go to the big city and do good. Lois Lane is the captivating investigative journalist that captures Clark's eye. Lex Luthor is not only the most powerful man in the world, but his hatred for the threat that Superman poses makes him hatch a plan that not only forces Superman to ask Luthor for help, but that Superman doesn't even realize he's fixing a problem Luthor created to begin with. The story is about naivety and coming of age and trying to see the best in people in a world where not every cloud has a silver lining. These are the types of stories where Superman excels when he is challenged by things that all of his powers can't solve. Superman can save every child from a burning village. He can even go and get them lumber from another continent, come back, rebuild all of their houses, and take food from some tropical island and give them enough to start over. But he can't be there 24/7. He can't stop a gang from seeing all these new houses and all this food and just taking it for themselves. He can't raise these poor children with the same values that he had, and so on. Basically, Superman is the pie-in-the-sky dreamer that wants to fix everything and save everyone, and the most evil a villain can be to someone like that is to show them how wrong they are for believing it. Superman stories aren't about whether he can win or not. That's a foregone conclusion. What they're about is, should he win, and what would it cost? Another thing to keep in mind is something that I employed myself in the Dragon's Dream saga. Main character Cora Blake has regeneration. Nothing can really kill her. How do I avoid plot armor in a situation like that? Well, trauma doesn't regenerate. The people around her don't regenerate. There are ways to crush and hurt and torment a character like this. By the time I got to Book 8 of the Dragon's Dream saga, Cora had retired herself and hid in the mountains of Wyoming, so afraid of losing the people that she loved that she wasn't even willing to be an unstoppable force anymore. It made sense for the character too. She'd been through so much psychological pain over her life that she was frightened into inaction. This exact same thing happened in the astounding storyline Kingdom Come, where Superman in his much older years had returned to Kansas to enjoy the quiet, simple life his parents offered him. The world had moved on to supporting a darker and much more cynical brand of heroes that didn't mind using lethal means to remove threats. Superman couldn't abide it, but popular opinion told him that he was an antique. The choice between playing by those rules or walking away was no choice at all. Superman kept his values and retired. Again, this makes perfect sense for a character that can't easily be stopped by physical means. You do this by breaking down the character psychologically and use their own values and strengths against them. In essence, the trick isn't arguing over whether the best Superman was Henry Cavill, David Corenswet, Christopher Reeve, or Dean Cain. These guys brought the right look and read a script. That script was written by a person that understood some aspects of the character and failed at others. Every single one. Now, the real trick is separating the good from the bad in a way that feels like an enjoyable and believable story has been told. Or just go watch Superman 2. It's a little corny, sure, but it gets most of it right, and Superman didn't have to kill anybody or compromise his values. Between movies, series, and cartoons, I feel like I've spent my entire life watching Superman. Even though I don't feel like any Hollywood treatment has ever gotten it quite perfect, I've never got bored watching them try. There's something uniquely beautiful and wholesome about Superman as a character and a role model. He isn't from Earth, but he's the greatest reflection of our best qualities. He has immense power, but he uses it for the common good. He could subjugate mankind, but he'd rather serve it. Few other characters have ever captured my attention like that. Don't forget to check out my new website. The link is in the description below. You'll also find a link to my newsletter in the comments where you can get a free book, read about all of my latest projects, and find other indie authors for your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, have fun and get crafting.